Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and with us this evening is Chelmsford's Chief Assessor, Mr. Frank Reen. And Frank, we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it as always, Sam.
This is now, I guess we can say this has turned into an annual event because we had you on last year at about this time, a little later. I think it was in January of last year. And one of the reasons we asked Frank to come on this time of year is because we are getting ready to send out fiscal 21 property tax bills.
Third quarter property tax bills.
And we'll explain that in a minute, but residents who are property owners in town certainly are aware of that process, and they will be getting their tax bills sometime after the first of the year, very shortly after the first of the year. So it's a good idea to have Frank on so we can talk a little bit about how that process works and things like appeals and abatements and so on and so forth. So we'll get into that. Before we start, I'll just make a very short statement about the Board of Assessors and who the board is and what they do and what Frank does. Board of Assessors is a three-member appointed board. We are appointed by the town manager, and under Massachusetts state law, if you are an assessor, an appointed or an elected, some towns the assessors are elected, appointed or an elected board member, you have to actually qualify as an assessor. So the state says that you have to take some courses and you have to pass an examination that's given by the Department of Revenue. And once you've done that, then you are certified as an assessor and you're allowed to sign off on all of the legal forms, the recap sheet, and so on and so forth that are required under state law. However, the assessors in a town like Chelmsford, we don't actually do the day-to-day assessing work. And that is a very good thing for the residents, probably, that we don't do that. The actual work is done by Frank and his very capable staff. So Frank, with that introduction, let's get into it a little bit. How many years have you had in the assessing field?
26 years. 26 years, 20 of which have been spent here in the town of Chelmsford. Of those 20 years, I just celebrated my 20th year this past October. 18 of which is the Chief Assessor.
I wish I had known that. We would have done something.
Then get a little cake or something, little cake house or something.
Right, right.
18 of which have been the Chief Assessor. Prior to that, I did fee appraising, which is bank appraising, for about a year, and construction background prior to that, which gave me, which was more helpful than I thought it would be.
Exactly.
To go into the assessment field, or the appraising field in general. An opportunity presented itself to get into the assessment, and I did that 6 years in Reading, and as I said, about another 20 here in Chelmsford.
So you're certainly very knowledgeable on the process, without a doubt, and the town, which is very important to have that number of years dealing. I mean, certainly the geologic configuration of the town doesn't change that much.
It doesn't.
Land is land. It can be built upon. It can be vacant. You know, the things that are put on the property certainly can change, but it's good to have that feel. Somebody of your experience, you also have a very capable staff.
Very capable staff.
And it's a fairly new staff.
We've had a 75% turnaround in the last 5 to 7 years. All three are quick studies, for which I am grateful. They also had good training. My former assistant, who retired a couple of years ago, Catherine Bianchi, trained a couple of them very well, for which I am the benefactor of, which I appreciate. But they are quick studies and were irreplaceable in this most recent reval, which I was glad I was able to reference during the selectmen's meeting the other day. I threw a lot at them, and they more than answered the bell, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's they're very well prepared, and it certainly makes everybody's job easier.
It certainly does, particularly mine.
A crew like that you can rely on. I mean, I always thought that if you are a good and capable manager of a function, in your case, an operating department, then you ought to be able to leave for a couple of days without having to worry about whether the actual work is going to be done correctly or not. And I think you've got that level of confidence in your staff.
I have some concern it'll be improved upon when I for a few days.
It might actually get better if I weren't here, right? I know I've had that feeling myself a few times when I was in the workforce. So why don't we talk a little bit about the differences between appraising, or that's not the right word, between valuing a property for resale, such as a real estate broker might do. I want to put my house on the market, so I call Joe Reddy, and I say, Joe, come on over to the house and take a look at it, and let's talk about what you think the house should list for.
Right.
There's that number. And then there's the number that the homeowner gets every year on his third quarter tax bill, which we just said will be mailed out at the end of this year. And those two numbers might not be the same. Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about why that is, and maybe you can just highlight some of the differences between the type of a value determination that a real estate broker might put on a property for sale and what your office does.
Sure. And funny you, Joe Reddy, as an example, he and I have had this conversation in this very room. If Joe goes out to a home and getting prepared to list it, what he'll do is pull 3 to 5, maybe more, very recent sales of similar properties, maybe even some on markets. And what it establishes for him is a range of what that property will potentially sell for in the current market. Excuse me. Not unlike what an appraiser would do if they're working for a bank or just doing a refinance on a home for either a sale or a refinance, as I say. They'll pull comparables within the last 6 months, ideally, within a relatively close proximity to the subject property, a couple of miles, no more. And what they're trying to establish is the property's value as of now, or a given date very close to now. In assessment, it's very different. What we're looking at, in some respects, it's very different. We look to a date that's much older. For instance, the values that are about to be issued, in, as you say, later on this month, is based on a January 1st, 2020 assessment date, using the prior 12 months worth of sales. So now we're looking at calendar 19. From a Joe Reddy perspective or a broker's perspective, that's ancient history. From an assessment standpoint, it's very current, and those are what we look to. So right off the bat, we're looking at two different market time frames. We also are looking at all sales that took place during that time frame. 350 sales of single-family homes, another 250 sales of condominiums, plus commercial properties, of course, which is somewhat of a different animal. With respect to single-family homes, we then break it up and do a ratio analysis on those, and we look at it a number of different ways. Similar in some respects as an appraiser would look at it, by style of home, age of home, size, location within the town, and a number of other factors. And we have to kind of do an assessment ratio. The overall median assessment to sale ratio has to be right around anywhere from 90 to 110, with a perfect number being a 95. And then any deviance from that in some of the subsorts can't be more than 5 percentage points. So what they're looking for is a relatively tight relationship between all styles of homes, all locations in the town, all size of homes. Not that they be assessed the same, but their relationship to sale price to assessed value be relatively equitable.
Yes, okay, and that's, I think, an excellent explanation of what you do as an assessor for assessment purposes. And what you've just described, basically what you're trying to do is determine what the market is for assessment purposes, the market being not the market as
Not the current
of
market
today, but the market as of a year ago. And in some cases, as I understand it, if you're looking at a property that's rather unusual and you can't find the comps, sometimes you can go back 18 months.
You can go back another, you can grab another 12 months worth of sales. Right. And we do that pretty consistently for 2 families and 3 families here in town. Single families, there's no problem getting the required amount of sales each and every year. 2 families, we only have 219 2-family homes here in town. We only have 19 3-family homes here in town. So we can easily go a year or 2 without a 3-family selling. We always have 6 or 8 2 families that sell, but that's not always enough to get enough data to do it, so we would pull it from another year. We can either go back 12 months or into 2020. Whatever we decide to do, we have to do it consistently when we do it at any other time for any other class of property. So for instance, this year for 2 families, we had to go back into calendar 18 in order to get enough sales to do a reasonable analysis.
Now, at that point, and this is where a lot of people get confused, okay, you're not done. I mean, what you've done at this point is you've determined the market, but that is not how you value a specific property, okay? So maybe, and now we're getting into the cost aspect of it, so maybe you can explain that a little bit about what you do from that point.
When we, with respect to single families, of course, there are 2 things that drive the value in terms of literally making up the value. It's the land in the building. Land, ideally, we would use land sales if there are any. But in a community like Chelmsford that's for the most part built out, we don't have enough land sales often to do that. So we do land residual analysis, which we take the sale price, subtract the replacement cost new for a building for a sale, and then it gives us kind of an indicated land value, and we can do analysis on that. With respect to building values, we used some of the cost factors and cost tables provided to us from Marshall and Swift, as well as some contractors in town that were able to provide that kind of data to us, and some other sources to kind of get a sense of current building values. So what that gives us is the replacement cost new if a home was to be built today in this current climate and labor costs. Then we have to, of course, back off of depreciation for the age of homes. Most homes in town here are anywhere from 15 to 100 years old, which of course it's a diminishing there's depreciation, so we would back off for that for the building.
And you get those general factors using the process that you described, but then you also may have a situation where you find homes, older homes specifically, that really are not representative of the market. So, and I don't know, and you know the numbers, I'm going to make them up because I don't know the numbers, but let's say that the typical market view for assessment purposes says that the market says your kitchen is 15 to 20 years old. Okay, I don't know if that's right or not, but I'm just, you see where I'm going with this. Now you've got a house that's very old, and the kitchen hasn't been updated for 70 years. Okay, how does that affect the value? How does that affect the process?
It does. It affects the value in that it's continued depreciation for the home. Generally, it's an older home, and we just what we do is account for it in what we call the effective year, which any appraiser would be well aware of, in which you can have a home built in 1850, but the effective year of it might be 1995 or 1970. Essentially, attesting to the kind of level of care that property has been receiving over the years. If that same 150-year-old home is receiving extensive care above and beyond, then we would kind of reflect the effective year as being younger. If it's a little bit more dated, then we would keep the effective year older. Once again, accounting for, to some degree, the condition, but just that it's not receiving exceptional attention. And that would be including a kitchen. Often we find older homes and they get a refurbished kitchen, that does increase the value as you would expect it to. But to some extent, it's also a maintenance issue once the kitchen gets to be 30 and 40 years old. It would require a certain amount of attention.
And you note those things. If you look at the property cards, for example, and you look at a particular residential card, and it might say kitchen modern.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is an indication that it's where it should be relative to whatever the market says. Right. So now we have a residential situation. So we've used the market or sales approach, plus we've used the cost method. So you use the 2 methods together to arrive at that. Now, how about to arrive at the value? And how about for commercial and industrial properties?
Certainly sales are reviewed, but as I said earlier, we typically don't have enough sales, but we do get some sales. What we do for the commercial, industrial, income-producing properties, which would also include larger apartment buildings, anything greater than 4 family, which now we're beginning to get a lot more of those. We send out each year, the beginning of the year, February, March timeframe, a form to be filled out called an income and expense. And as the name describes, we ask that they include the income derived from the real estate, not the business itself, just the real estate, and the expenses associated with maintaining that building.
So this would typically be from a lease.
That's correct. The owner sometimes provided, or sometimes the tenant who's been there, who pays for these different items, might provide the information. What I always want to encourage the property owner is that this information is held in strict confidence, remains in my office, is not shared with anybody outside my office. With this information, it helps us get a sense both how that particular building is performing, but more importantly, what market rents are here in town, and what the expenses that are being incurred by these buildings. This gives the home property owner an opportunity to let them know if their building isn't performing particularly well, if it's had extended and protracted vacancy issues. That's their opportunity to make us aware of that.
So that process, where you take a look at the I&E sheets, that helps you to establish whatever that commercial lease market is for the area.
That's correct.
Yes. And you also might use the elements of the cost method also factor.
Absolutely, they reconcile with the cost.
And in terms of commercial properties that are not lease properties, there may be instances where you would use the income method to value that property, and it would be sort of an imputed thing using just the market data.
That's correct.
Yeah.
What we do, once we key in all the data relative to all the income and expense, that's our actual data. Then we develop what's known as economic market data that's applied to many more properties based on that the actual data that indicates what the market value is, what the market is in terms of rents and vacancies. So most parcels we've developed an economic approach to valuation, the income approach. And that's how we reconcile that with the actual. We reconcile that with any sales that we happen to have with commercial properties.
And that's generally thought to be the most reliable for that type of property, because that's what, when people buy real estate for investment purposes, they're looking to lease the property, and that is the market. So it indicates value.
It is.
Yeah.
It does. If we have enough sales, or a particular type of building, that is also an excellent indicator.
Right. But you have to examine those sales, because the sale price may be based on something other than just the value of the real estate.
Goodwill, personal property,
right.
Business.
And the law specifically says you are only allowed to tax based on the value of the real estate, not the value of a lease, not the value of inventory, not the value of goodwill.
That's correct.
So
any sale price that includes those items and is being considered in an appraisal as a comparable, adjustments would have to be made continually with support, of course, backing off some of those attributes.
So that's all very important. So now here we are in Chelmsford, and we're about to get our tax bills, and the selectmen for, I believe, this is the third year in a row.
This is the third year.
Okay, have elected to do a split tax rate, which the town had in the mid to late 90s. I think for a 5 or 6 year period we had a split rate, and then the selectmen decided to go back to a unified or a single rate. And 3 years ago, the selectmen elected to enact the tax shift once again. So how does that typically, well, not typically, but because you understand how it works here in Chelmsford, because you have to administer that process. So given the split of value, residential versus commercial in this town, typically how would right now I think they've elected to maintain the 22% shift.
That's correct.
So typically how would that affect, what would be the ratio in terms of how much more a commercial property would have to pay as opposed to if we still had the single rate? And how much would the residential taxpayer save?
In that scenario?
You don't have to give numbers because you don't have them in front of you, but just percentage-wise or proportionally.
Sure. Anytime you hear whatever the split is in any given community, in Chelmsford's case, it's a 122, as you say. That means every commercial industrial property is paying 22% higher than they would if they had a single tax rate.
Okay.
Because Chelmsford has roughly an 83-17 valuation share, there's a greater number of residential properties here in town than there are commercial, both in valuation and in count. What that means is the commercial properties go up 22% as a result of this 22% shift, and the residential go up probably 4 or 5%. Go up, or adjusted about 4 or 5%
Right.
savings. So I think the first year,
So it's about a 5-to-1 ratio.
That's right.
If you had a commercial property and a residential property that were valued at the same rate, I mean, this one's worth 600,000. This one's worth 600,000.
That's right.
It's about a multiplier of 5. So if I'm saving $100 on my tax as a homeowner, if I own the commercial property with the same value, I'm going to pay an extra $500 in property
Right,
tax.
that's
Okay, so it's about a 5-to-1 ratio. All right. So now the other thing the selectmen did, and I think it's probably a good thing to do because of the number of small businesses we have here in town. I think you indicated at the selectmen's meeting the other night that the majority of our commercial business properties are in effect small businesses.
they are.
So the selectmen have, in addition to doing the split rate, they've elected to continue the small commercial exemption. So if you could just briefly explain
Certainly.
how that works.
The small commercial exemption, which they enacted the first year they adopted the split rate, provides that any commercial parcel, not industrial, but any commercial parcel valued at $1 million or less with 10 or fewer full-time employees would be eligible for the small commercial exemption, depending on the adopted percentage by the select board. In this case, and for the last 3 years, including this year, it's 10%. The first year we had, I think it was 166 that qualified, went up to 180, and I think we have well over 200 this year.
Well, many of them didn't know in the
They
first
didn't
year,
know, and-
so there were some that were left out because they didn't apply.
That's correct.
Right.
The Department of Unemployment Assistance furnishes us each and every year with a list of all businesses that have 10 or fewer employees. So that's kind of our starting point to identifying potential parcels that would qualify. It's an incomplete list, but it's an absolute list in the sense that they all definitively have 10 or fewer and have to be considered.
Well, it's a lot better than nothing.
That's correct. That's a starting point.
Exactly.
Which was very much appreciated the first year we went into it.
So, all right, so now we have a strip mall, and we have a small strip mall, and with 3 stores. And the property itself is valued at $950,000. And we have 3 businesses on that property, and Business A has 8 employees. Business B has 7 employees. Business C has 12 employees. Do they get the exemption?
They do not, nor is it prorated in any way.
Okay.
That automatically disqualifies the building.
The entire parcel.
The entire parcel. In that same scenario, if all 3 qualified, that is to say they have 10 or fewer, they would get the 10% small commercial exemption, though that savings is passed on to the property owner. Even though it's the business technically that helped that building or enabled that building to qualify, the savings is passed on to the owner of the property. The other important component to this is the bottom line is the town does not collect less money as a result of this or any other exemption. What happens is it's a shift within class. So the commercial industrial, those buildings that enjoy the benefit of the small commercial exemption, the burden they no longer have is passed on to those that don't qualify within the commercial class in all industrial buildings who do not participate in this, who do not get any access to this particular exemption. So they bear the burden for those that do qualify.
Right, right. So that's probably another sticking point for some of the larger commercial property owners that feel that in addition to having to pay more taxes as a result of the split, they now are finding that they have to subsidize some of their smaller, and some of those people may actually be competitors.
They make it competitive, and that's been the argument.
I never thought about that until that point was brought up to me about a year and a half ago by a larger commercial property owner who did not get the benefit of the small exemption, and his comment to me was, well, he said the town is basically picking winners and losers here with this thing, and I don't. That was his opinion, and he certainly has a right to express it. I don't feel that way myself. I don't think that's the component of it, and certainly is not the intent. I did some research on the legislative history of this several years ago, and the small commercial exemption, clearly the legislature, the intent was to help out the mom and pop shop. That's why that thing is there. You know, the husband and wife who own the little cleaning establishment or the camera shop or whatever it happens to be, and it's probably a shoestring marginal business, and they're barely making a living. And if their community decides to do the split rate, it's going to fall on them, and that's why the commercial exemption was put in. It certainly wasn't put in to help the UPSs of the world.
I wouldn't think so.
So that's from that standpoint, I'm glad the selectmen choose to do that. I think that sends a very good signal to the business community, and whereas the majority of our commercial property businesses appear to be in that category. I think
$1 million or less.
That's entirely appropriate. So why don't we, we've got 4 minutes left. We know the tax bills are going out January 1st, and my experience is you get it within a day or two. January 2nd or 3rd, you're probably going to get your property
That's correct.
tax
They're going
bill.
out, I think I was told today by the collector.
So what's going to be different this year? What do you think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway and have you explain it. What do you think the taxpayer may notice this year that's a little different from previous
This is
years?
different from any other, my 20 years doing this, for reasons that have been expressed during town meeting and are too lengthy to go into, but tying into COVID to a great extent, in that the town manager, in his infinite wisdom, recognized that we may have some state aid shortfall. So he provided that we fund part of the levy through other sources. Basically, the upshot of it is we're raising less money this year, or comparable to very comparable to last year. So what I think most taxpayers will see is a relatively stable tax environment. Some may go up. There'll be different experiences as valuations vary. The average is about a $50 increase. There will be some that are more and some that are less. That's true of condominiums as well.
Whereas in most of the previous years that I've been involved in this process, the average tax increase for the average value property is anywhere between $200 to $300
That's
a
correct.
year. This year, as Frank just said, typically the average, again, don't hold us to these numbers if it doesn't line up directly with your experience, but the average will be an increase of my understanding was between $35 and $50.
That's right.
Yeah, you know, and I think that is going to make some people happy, and it may even cut down on the number of abatement requests we get.
I'm hoping. I'm hoping that happens. That's a reasonable assumption.
So if a taxpayer opens up his bill and he feels that his property has been unfairly valued,
Right.
Has a higher value than he thinks, what should he do? And you've got about a minute and a half.
All right, I'm going to cover a couple things with my
Okay.
last minute and a half. They should apply for, submit an application for abatement. They receive their tax bill, they think the value that's placed on it is more than what they could have received for the home, or that the data is incorrect. They should file an application for abatement with my office no later than February 1st. That's an absolute date. None will be date stamped in or accepted after the January 1st deadline, which is the due date of the third quarter bill. There are a couple other things that you can call my office for more information on that. I'll give the number in a moment. I also want to stress that excise bills will be issued at the beginning of the year. Anybody who's changed vehicles or that sort of thing may be entitled to an abatement on their excise bill. Some of the personal, what we call statutory exemptions that Sam is very familiar with. The due date for filing that with my office is April 1st. There's time for that still, but I just wanted to make mention of it.
You have a lot more time for the.
We do. The other thing I want to
exemption.
mention that is somewhat different than some other communities here at the Merrimack Valley is we're open. We're open for business. All town offices are open to the public. We still encourage them to do their business as best they can by email or by phone call. Over the years, there's a greater amount of information that can be done that way without having to be in-person contact, spare themselves the time and trouble to come in. They can often do it at night by sending emails back and forth, and we can get a lot done that way. The town's business, my phone number is 978-250-5220, and my email is Freen, Freen, at chelmsfordma.gov. Any questions you may have, or any of these abatements, or anything regarding assessment, by all means.
Thank you very much, Frank. Don't call me. Call him. He's the guy who does the work.
That's it.
Okay? So
Thank
thank
you
you very much, Frank, and we'll have you on soon again.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Thank you, Sam.
It's a wrap.